Welcome to Rollwise, the weekly podcast that explores all things tabletop RPGs. I'm Mike, one of your hosts, and I'm joined by my fellow RPG enthusiasts, Brent
Hello, guys.
and Jeff.
Hi, everyone.
So settle in and let's get started on this week's show. So I guess just to kind of give you a preview of what we're going to be talking about, we're going to do a little bit of a jog around the news. There were some important updates, announcements, and other things since we talked last week. And we'll be hitting some highlights there, as well as we're going to be talking a little bit about universal systems. Jeff and I played with a third person who is new to role playing, and we actually gave Risus another spin. So we have some thoughts that we can share on that, as well as just chaosium has put out a new update for their basic role-playing system that is kind of leaned it up, trimmed it up. And so we're going to talk about those two separate universal style role-playing games, the strengths of each, the weaknesses of each, as best as we can tell. And so let's get in, let's start, and let's get talking about some news. So the biggest news, obviously, that we've had, and it's just kind of hot off the presses, is that the Matt Mercer and Micah Burton were basically giving an announcement saying that the Critical Role folks are going to be putting out a few games, but two of them are actually going to be tabletop RPGs. One is going to be the Illuminated World system, which is designed more for short, compelling, arc-driven stories. I don't think it has any like specified genres or anything like that. And this is going to be crafted by, as they said, Strass Asimovic and Layla Adelman. And if I said those wrong, I apologize.
Good try,
and it's going to be a D6 system. And then they're also putting out what they call Daggerheart, which is a new system designed for long-term fantasy campaign play with rich options as your character progresses. And that's quote unquote from their website. And so I guess the one that interests me out of those two is actually going to be Daggerheart, because the long campaign fantasy is kind of interesting to me. But when they say a new system, what do you guys get the impression of from Critical Role, and what does new mean to you?
Well, I think it'll probably be a D20 system. That would be my guess. It'll be more similar to D&D than not, but it'll be a new name and it'll have its own little intricacies. But I think it'll probably just based on the Critical Role being kind of a show where they like that swing. They like the big wins and the big losses, crits and fails. I'm pretty sure it'll probably be a D20 type system. That's one of the things that surprised me was when they said it was going to be a D6. The other system was going to be a D6 system, because usually the D6 systems are more of a, like your curve is usually flatter, so you get a lot less of those like big swings. So I was kind of surprised that was one of the things they were doing. I assume Daggerheart will be a D20 system, similar to D&D, but intellectually separate.
Do you think that, and this is actually kind of a question that I'm curious about, because I know that Brennan Lee Mulligan, who I respect quite heavily in this space, he recently introduced that rolling with emphasis mechanic. And for those who haven't seen it, rolling with emphasis is where a player is prompted to roll 2d20s and take the result furthest away from 10. Do you think that that's them kind of like taking a test drive on some of the rules they might want to include in this Daggerheart game to kind of give it its own flair and spin?
I don't think that's a rule. That might be a rule that they put in there because to play fan service to the show. But I don't think that's a test rule. That, like I was talking with Jeff about off the podcast at some point. In my opinion, that's a performative rule. Like that's a rule where you made it for a show. Because like Brendan Lee Mulligan usually gets like his special dice box and everything and has them roll the 2 dice and makes like a big deal out of it. And then everybody's like, they either freak out that there's a critical success or there's a critical fail. Like, and so I think that's something that's more performative, I think. And so I don't think it'll necessarily be a rule in the book. It might be suggested or an optional rule, but I don't think it was them testing anything. I think it's something that he likes to do to get a reaction out of his players.
That's fair. That's
my opinion on the roll for emphasis anyways.
I was just kind of curious because I thought the roll for emphasis, it's a neat idea. And I mean, I just know that at least in this group, we know where the emphasis would be going. I'm looking at you, Brent.
You mean the hope that I fail? Like, because that's exactly why I wouldn't enjoy those sort of rules. Like,
No, you already expect that you're going to fail. So it's the chance that you could spectacularly succeed.
You know, Brent, you really just need to believe in your dice more. I think you just
my guys need to believe in me more, I think.
Yeah,
That's fair.
I don't know if you need to buy more, but on some of those dice, the mojo is gone.
When you can
And
be
it
at
seems like it's not coming back.
when you could be at a 40K tournament and you're playing people and you're rolling scads of 6-sided dice, and this guy you don't know is going, "I'm really sorry." Like, that means something as far as your dice rolling is concerned. I'm really sorry. That's a lot of ones that you rolled there. Yeah, I know.
They feel bad for you. Like, I feel kind of terrible that you had an overwhelming advantage and I'm walking all over you.
Yeah. Your army's really good. Mine's not so good, but you roll really badly. I'm sorry. Yeah, thanks. I know.
One of the things I noticed, when I watched I didn't watch the announcement video, but I watched a video about the announcement video that showed parts of it, was for the shorter system, right? For the one shots and the story driven arcs. They both said who was designing it and the type of dice system that were there. For Daggerheart, for the campaign length one, they didn't mention any of that. They were, again, didn't watch the announcement video itself, but from what I saw, there was a lot of details that were not let out of the bag. So it could be like Brent says, it could be, something that is D&D or Pathfinder adjacent, or, one of several other systems that essentially use a D20 type system. More to come. I just don't know what to think. New just means they're adding stuff.
Yeah, I think the reason is I think Illuminated Worlds has probably been something they've been working on longer, and I would guess, a kind of educated guess, that Daggerheart started to happen when the problems came up.
Yeah. No, that could be. I mean, no, it could be. It could have been, well, we never thought this would happen, but there's a chance now that our livelihood is being jacked with, and so we are going to preemptively remove that possibility. And honest to God, more power to them. If the system is great, even if it's just entertaining for them to play, it still will be a show that tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people will love. I just don't know their viewership. I know it's surprisingly large.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, if anything, that I'm sure that they'll probably tease additional information as it gets closer and closer. But I don't know if you guys saw, but their intent was to kind of basically show these off at Gen Con this year. And admittedly, like, Gen Con has been on the list, I know, at least for Brent and I, but and I have a place to stay if we wanted to get to Indiana. I have friends there, so we could even avoid the hotel. Yeah. But the problem is
that's where all the fun things happen.
I'm an old man these days. The kind of fun things that happens at cons at like after hours and stuff like that.
I just like hotels from lack of responsibility.
That's true.
And having to deal with other people. I like hotels. August 3rd through the 6th.
Yeah. I'm sure. Well, I mean, we could try to make it, but I don't even know how you get tickets for it, since I've never actually had looked into
whenever they go on sale, which they probably already have. So
which means they're probably already gone.
Yeah.
It's kind of like Comic-Con here, is that Comic-Con is so hard to get into in California that it's like, I think you have to be a raffle and there's a lot of clandestine steps to get your tickets.
Comic-Con was hard to get in the early 2000s. The tickets were, when I was going. Like, you had to be on. Like, when they released, you had to be on, because they sold out in a couple of hours, and now they probably sell out in minutes. Like, the concert tickets.
It's a weird.
I don't even try anymore.
January 29th is when the con badges go on sale.
for Gen Con?
Actually, for Gen Con, yeah. Single day badges will be able to purchase beginning noon. Oh, wait, let me reread the whole thing. Will be available for purchase beginning noon Eastern on January 29th. So that's single day. And then registration for free. Oh, and then registration free online only badge will begin on May 7th. Housing registration. So yeah, it looks like the badges go on sale basically January 29th.
Oh, well, maybe next year. Who knows? If anybody wants to see us at Gen Con, they can help us go in 2024. That'll be our goal. Who knows?
We better start that Patreon.
Yeah, someday. So I guess in the grand scheme of things, I mean, the coolest part about it is that it does seem like when you see what people are doing, first of all, you see, Cobalt Press, who we've talked about, a couple times, they're putting together their revisions of 5th edition to make it a better game, which seems like it's going in a little bit of a different direction than the WotC folks are doing, that are making 5th edition into a different game.
It's all backward compatible, Mike. They assured me. So
it's a little weird, but I mean,
5th edition 2024.
Confusing as hell. But this game, Daggerheart, is going to be kind of neat. And then of course we have Matt Colville's project. Did he give that one a name?
I don't think he's given a name for it yet. I haven't seen anything saying that.
Yeah. So whatever his project is ultimately going to be named is going to be, I think, a very good take on epic fantasy and all that kind of stuff. And so, I mean, it seems like everyone is really embracing that. And everyone, I mean, I hate to say there's too many games to play, because that's, it kind of is like one of those, you long to give them all a shake, but it's nice. You got a nice number of games out there that you really play whatever you want.
And anytime, like with games and art, I say if you're interested, buy it, just because sometimes you should purchase things just because they should exist. I'm a strong believer in that. So if you have any interest in the game whatsoever, like, you should buy it and give it a read, just because they deserve to have those books out there, I think. So
yeah. I think that the market can use some competition from a game that's really great. I hope that we see one coming out in the next year or two. There's a lot of really, 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 really good games, but it's a top heavy industry. The big players are really big, and the biggest player is bigger than that. So I fully support some of these people, some of these groups bringing out their own stuff, putting their own spin on things. Let's see what it is. Let's give it a try. I mean, that's one thing that we do. We probably invest too much, in some of these publishers' works. There's a backlog of games that need to be played, but it is really cool. It's why I like our group, is that we're all, willing to take a flyer on a new game and to give it a try and do things that we haven't done before, because it's fun. I get the appeal of sticking with the cozy, friendly, system that you all love and have played for years and years and years, and have characters that you've shepherded it up, way high. That's awesome too. But, I think I prefer a little variety.
Yeah. It is the spice of life, if I'm going to be cheesy. So
that was cheesy.
I just don't know how you can keep people that interested for that long. Like, those are some diehard people that do games for years with the same characters
and the same people. How do they not have any internal infighting, or people moving, or having kids, or anything? How do you keep 10 people together for longer than 2 years?
Well, this is kind of, I mean, it's tangential, but it's kind of on topic. But was I share that with you, Brent, a few months back, where that guy had the longest running D&D game?
I thought I shared that with you, but it was one way or the other.
I don't remember. I just remember seeing that and being like, because the guy has had a continuous D&D game for 40 years or something like that.
Since he was in high school, and he's older than us. So
yeah, he's been doing D&D forever. And I mean, it, like, you can imagine that the campaigns are generational. It's just been like, this is Sunday, and now it's like 300 years later. Like, that's like, this has been an unbroken chain of events, and people are, heroes. They're descendant of heroes. They know the heroes. They know the characters for all that kind of stuff. He paints them all miniatures and does all this kind of cool.
That's cool.
Like he
And
fabricates everything.
His daughter plays the game, and then his daughter's boyfriends play the game, and then he has to have the talk with her that if they don't see each other anymore, like they can't just leave the game.
Yeah, they have to be written out of the story in an appropriate way. Yeah, I remember that. That was weird.
It was a little weird.
Sorry,
like I was like,
the game comes first.
And no one touches their own models ever. Yeah.
No, but that's cool though, that like they could do that for so long. Like I mean, on some levels, I'm kind of envious of those people that are like, I ran a 10-year game, and I'm like, shit, I can't even get people together for more than 3 months straight. Like,
it's you guys have played with me long enough. I'm good for like 8-9 months, and then I get antsy where stuff starts coming up, and then I just sort of drop out for a little while.
Yeah, I think
I get lonely, and then I come back.
I think what it is if you can get that one epic game, like if you can get one game that people talk about, like I think that's really what most people want. They don't necessarily want a game that lasts years, but they want a game that lasts long enough to feel appropriately epic and to be something that can be one of those games where it's like, hey, remember when? Yeah. And I think that's really what people are looking for.
Yeah, and that's not too bad. So, all right. So I think the next little bit of news, we're probably only going to highlight it, but we're going to, toss the proverbial post-apocalyptic baton over to Brent, and he's going to give us an update about Clan Wars, his new favorite miniatures game. Brent?
I can't say that because I don't know anything about the miniatures game yet, because so far it's been hints and veiled attempts at revelation. What Clan Wars is we've talked about the game to Genesis a few different times as a game that's really beautifully produced, but it looks like they are making a foray into, I believe it's a skirmish miniature game with the Genesis setting, and that they just started announcing the production of that. So if you play Genesis or interested in Genesis, the Genesis is free. You can download most, if not all, of the books free from their website, and there's a new miniature game coming out, so that'll be interesting to see what they do with that. And they're not Kickstartering it. It doesn't look like. It looks like they're doing it themselves. Yeah, there's been no announcement of a Kickstarter, and they didn't Kickstarter the original Genesis at all, so they obviously have some sort of backing.
So what you're saying is basically that if you enjoy the Genesis or you enjoy the miniatures based on what we've already talked about, just go buy the miniatures, because apparently they're putting at great personal expense.
Well, yeah, and they'll probably be beautiful because the art in Genesis is amazing. Like the art production in Genesis above everything else is amazing. They also wrote a really good, really complicated, detailed story, but the art is very good.
Yeah, I think this is the second time I think we've talked about miniatures on the tabletop RPG thing. So maybe we'll have a miniatures corner for talking about that down the road. Who knows?
For me, that's so sweet.
I've touched miniatures in the past.
Yeah, touch them.
I can contribute.
Yeah.
So I mean, it does look interesting. If you guys are interested in Genesis and haven't heard, join their Discord for all the updates that they want. They'll probably hit you with a lot of weird announcements because they're trying to grow the community there, and it's like,
and talking about miniature wargaming is kind of like talking about drug addiction. So it's got to be kind of careful.
Well, it's
expensive. I
sold
a TV to buy that new miniature pack from GW.
My family doesn't get me. They tried to have an intervention. I feel like that's probably happened in some families, actually.
I'm sure it has, actually.
So, okay. Well, then, so I guess with kind of some of the news out of the way, there's obviously probably more news out in the RPG world, but we'll let other people talk about that. Let's talk about...
We're not a news podcast, ladies and gentlemen. We're not a news podcast.
But let's talk about Universal Systems, because last week, was it last week? Was it just last Friday, Jeff?
Yes, it was last Friday.
Jesus. So with last Friday, I had the chance to sit down and run Jeff and one more person through a one shot in the Risus system. And for those that don't know, Risus is kind of is a universal system that is a very basic. Um, it's a very basic game, and I've heard people call it like a beer and pretzels game and everything like that because it's very clever for as little mechanics that are associated with it. Very much more on the improv heavy, rules light version of the universal system, but there's no real container that you have to force it into. You don't have to play a fantasy game. You can play a fantasy game. You don't have to play a modern game. You can play a modern game. So, with that being said, I was kind of curious since this was your first go at it with Rises. What did you think, and how I'm not going to use the other person's name on stream, but how did you and the other and your SO think about the game? What were your thoughts?
We had fun. I mean, we had a couple of hours, so it was kind of it was a one shot. May extend into something else, but I think right at the beginning, we were still kind of feeling our way around,
Mhm.
especially with my partner not having, played as many role playing games as I have or as you have. Even I was feeling a little bit, and we tried to create our characters, and they were probably 60% of the way there. But we met with Mike and fleshed them out just a little bit more so that they were had a little bit more detail to them.
Mhm.
And I thought we had some decent character concepts, that fit the setting, and we had a lot of fun. The rules certainly don't get in the way. We picked four cliches each to help describe our characters, and those helped us when we needed to roll dice.
Mhm.
And for the most part, I think some things worked, some things didn't. Because of the dice rolls. But for the most part, we had a lot of fun. It was an entertaining few hours. What did you think running it? How did you feel we were doing as players?
I think honestly it was good. The nice thing about it was, and I think one of the greatest strengths about Rice's, and it could be Reese's, but I'm going to go with Rice's. I'm going to say is that in terms of new players, having put two new players with this did not have a lot of prep work, and I believe Brent said it before that he's like, if you have to give your players a lot to read to kind of prepare for the game, they're still going to show up to the game and still be like, I don't know how to do any of the things. And so the nice thing about Rices is you can explain Rices in like 10 minutes, maybe. Just to kind of break it down, which will not be what happens with basic role playing, which we'll talk about next, is that you pretty much have your cliches, which Jeff already talked about. The nice thing about cliches is it kind of helps you form your character by giving you an idea as to how your character behaves. So, like in Jeff's case, he had four simple cliches. He had a military pilot. He had kind of an everyman, skill or something like that. Jack of all trades kind of thing. And you can give these different cliches certain values, and you use these values to roll dice when there's a resolution that needs a dice mechanic to be applied. And so I think it's really accessible for most people because it's not that far out of how they, what they watch on TV, what they read in books, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's very easy to kind of like coalesce a character very quickly. And then, as you said, dice don't get in the way. I mean, we didn't roll a lot of dice in this adventure because I didn't want to make it a dice heavy game. But the nice thing is that you're really only rolling d6, and it's based on your value and your cliche, which, since in a beginning character's case, can really only be up to 4. So you're rolling just 4d6, either against a target number or in a contested, kind of like a contest 1v1, or in kind of a full out combat where it's a round by round contested roll and stuff like that. And that's really the only way that you have any kind of dice mechanics that you worry about. And there, I've just explained the entire game. Now anybody can go play the game. Like, that's how easy it is, and the rules are
Yeah,
free. I think you can just download them from their website. So it's
yeah,
not
they're
even like you
free,
have
and
to pay.
it's only what 4, 6 pages, something like that. I,
4
I
pages.
mean, really short. And one of the pages is about 3/4 of it is just cliches. And I will say, if you ever play it, the more specific you can get when your cliches really helps drill down and dial in the exact type of character. And I think when Jess and I did ours, we were probably a little generic
Mhm.
on, when we created our characters, we're probably a little generic. on some of our cliches, and so we tightened those up a little bit before we played. But we had a lot of fun. It was a nice little system. It'd be amazing at a convention or a party or something like that. If you get just people together that want to do something like that, because it doesn't take forever to explain or understand. And then it's just tell me what your character's doing, be your character. And it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. And so I think that's probably one of its weaknesses too, is that if you have those people that are kind of introverted and don't really do like the improv, I feel like if you have a table of 5 people and one of those people isn't really into that thing, they'll just kind of sit back and enjoy the ride, which is fine. I mean, some people just do that naturally, but I just like Risus isn't going to help you play your character better.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
There's always that thing where like I always when people talk a lot about introductory games, they always like people, I think their interpretation of what's complicated is they think sometimes rules are one of the things that's going to be really hard for someone. But I find like some of those systems that are rules light but like role play and improv heavy, like those can be pretty hard for new people too if they're not used to like jumping into a story, because like and we talked about this a little bit before, I think, where like because you are performing in front of an audience, because the other players become the audience the minute that you kind of take the spotlight. And so if you are introverted, like it can really feel like the spotlight's on you. And so that's where I think it comes into the other players to encourage that sort of thing, like encourage the person to take those steps forward. So I think that's interesting. I think it's good to hear that Risus kind of grease the wheels on that a little bit. And also I did want to say that quote is actually from a guy named Caleb Stokes, the guy that wrote Red Markets. He said that if you ask your players to read anything, you should just forget about it because they're not going to before the game.
And that's fine. And I mean, and I think that in this particular scenario, I don't think Jess necessarily read the 4-page pamphlet. But I don't think, it's nice when you don't.
We skimmed it and we focused on the cliches. Yeah. I don't want anybody to get the wrong idea. Like, we were not doing voices. There was no costumes. We are not incredibly theatric, but we had fun. And, you start interacting with each other as the characters instead of as the people we are in real life. And it starts to pull you out of your shell a little bit. And I think that helped, because I think we both did that to each other. And I think Mike did that, encouraged that.
Yeah. And I think that's something that that's one of those things that makes that big foray of like improv hard for people, is like when you tell them, act like your character, I think the immediate thought is, oh, do I need to do a voice or do something crazy? And it's like, no, you just need to tell us what that person would narrate, what that person would do. Yeah. And I think that's for new players, sometimes that's it's scary, I guess is the way I would say it. We've been doing it for long enough now that doing that in a game isn't, but it can be scary.
Yeah. We've all been intimidated at the table. Maybe not Mike, but I have. I am certainly a little quieter most of the time. So,
yeah. Well, and so I think that one thing that I would probably say about Risus, and then is that it's one of those games that even though it's like easy to learn, hard to master, whatever that quote is, it takes a lifetime to master kind of thing. But I think that the one of the most common drawbacks to the game is the fact that it doesn't have a lot of mechanical depth. Means that if you want to run a campaign, Risus is not really designed for it out of the box, right? So because at the end of the session that we ran, Jeff, there was no experience. There's no real experience that you do,
right? So, yeah, our characters aren't going to, unless we conceive of it and the cliches cover it and you allow, and the GM allows it. You're not really developing new skills or gaining new things or getting stronger or more epic in any way.
Yeah. And I mean, and so what they suggest in this is that they say that, if you want to do advancement, you should roll against every cliche that was used. If the dice lands showing even numbers, in the case it increased by 1 die in that cliche. So that, I mean, there's a small like advancement thing that it does, but it doesn't really make for a good long-term game. And I'm not even really sure. It doesn't also make it very even, because if you have 2 players that are playing the game, one could advance very differently
Yeah.
the other, and I think that that's something that the next game, Universal Role Playing, has a little bit of a trick to as well, is that it's because your successful skills, that there's a roll against that
Well,
to see if you increase them as well. So
Well, yeah, that's always the thing about those simpler systems, is the ones that there's kind of two ways that people do it. Is either your character is kind of the character that they will be and they will kind of stay that way, or there's the character advancement way.
Mhm.
And there's those middle ground game systems, like it sounds like Risus does that. Troika has a system kind of like that, where if it, like you hit a point and then you can roll to see if you would advance in the skill. And
Mhm.
that's actually something I never thought of. That you're right. Like if you have a party of 3 people, you could have one person that advances their skills every time it happens, and
Mhm.
the gap will quickly become
it it's not a very equal
right.
advancement opportunity, and I don't think it has to be. I think you can have a lot of fun with that. I just feel like it can be a little bit, it could probably get a little hairy, because I think one of my favorite games of Necromunda that really demonstrated why people like to see kind of a similar level of advancement. And if anybody who's played Necromunda back in the day knows that Necromunda had a lot of variety in how experience was doled out to the different gangers and
Necromunda
stuff.
is a miniature game for
And
everybody.
it's a miniature game that was produced by Warhammer people. What do they call the Games
Games
Workshop?
Workshop.
Yeah, the Warhammer
Yeah, those
people.
guys.
And I loved the game because it was the first time I really saw kind of a small skirmish thing in the Warhammer 40k
That's the
universe.
squad-based one, right?
Well, it
Like
was, you basically had a
you have like
gang.
6, 8 guys, something
Yeah,
like that.
Necromunda. Yeah, Necromunda is the gang. Yeah, it's a smaller squad based game.
Well, and so there was a lot of variability in the experience, and so like in this case it wouldn't happen, but I was fortunate enough to roll the exact dice needed to get one item that was like a gun that didn't break all the time. And all of a sudden I had one ganger that was my linchpin, and like because I had that one person, I could go and just mop up all these other people, because I got basically his ballistic skill was high enough that I never missed. He could shoot across the map, and like it was pretty much. I was like, oh,
Well,
well, that's how this
I
game works.
will I will point out that Necromunda is a little bit different than a cooperative storytelling game, because you
I
actually
know.
were physically winning a game that you had now had an advantage. So
It's
that's a
true,
little bit different as far as the feels bads.
but it basically can kind of show you that when you're all kind of in that same competitive mode, it kind of feels tough when it's all
Yes, when
random.
you're in a competitive game and you're kicking the other guy in the face and you're the guy that's wearing shoes, then yes, that is the one. That is usually one person's going to feel bad in that
That
instance.
is fun.
Yeah.
Or one person.
Yeah.
Yes.
So outside the advancement mechanic, which is it's not exactly greatly defined, but people have talked about the death spiral a little bit with the game. Is that when you do combat in Rises, is that because when you use your cliches, you basically you roll your 6-sided dice, and if you lose that, you actually lose a die going forward. It doesn't mean you die necessarily. It just means that you're losing the combat encounter.
Yeah, you
And
get
so
worse.
yeah, so you then get worse. So if you start to lose, you're more likely to lose every dice that you lose. Now, what's interesting and what people have suggested that are really kind of fond of the game is that you get really creative. You basically try to take away their tools of the trade. So if they happen to be, somebody shooting you with a gun, you try to disarm them and take their gun away. You do, and then if you do that, then they get half their dice, or you gang up. So like I actually suggested to Jeff and his partner to kind of team up on a roll to see that you can contribute to each other's roles and stuff. So there's some ways to kind of overcome those things, and I think that it's a very very fun game. Yeah, I like Rises. I actually think that Rises is kind of an easy go-to. I just want to run a one shot just to see how the story feels. I could easily throw something together in that. Not a lot of overhead there. So, Jeff, any final thoughts on Rises before we move on to basic universal role playing?
If you get a chance, play it. I think that's my final thought. Give it a shot.
Yeah. Okay. Well, in that case, we'll switch gears. Oh shit, when did it come out? April 7th. So maybe about 2 weeks now. We had Chaosium put out a new version of the basic role playing universal game engine. They put it out in PDF form, but if you buy it from the Chaosium website, I believe they mentioned that the cost of the PDF goes towards the cost of the book. So depending on where you like to pick your poison, you can get it at other digital locations. And this basic role playing universal system thing is pretty much a skeleton and by which you can decide the way that you want to play your game. However, because it's part of the whole Chaosium lineup of games, if you have a game that you want to play a certain way, they may already have a setting and system established for it. So if you want to play Cosmic Horror, don't play basic role playing, go with Call of Cthulhu, right?
Yeah.
And so I guess the first things is that if you have never heard of basic role playing system, it's not super complicated. However, the book did clock in, I think around 250 pages or so. So it has 266 pages. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's got a number of pages. And the funny thing is that this is actually shrunk down from the previous great big book that they had put out. And what you can see here is that you can actually see very much so them embracing the open source orc. And I think this is a perfect time for them to put their brand of skill based game out on the market. Before we get into the different texts and all that kind of, or the different changes that are just right off the bat, who's played a Chaosium game? I think maybe Brent, you might have the most experience with them, because I've only played a couple of Call of Cthulhu games.
I have not actually played basic Call of Cthulhu. I played Delta Green in its iterations, which is similar with some differences, but I have not actually played a base Call of Cthulhu game. Oh wait, no, yes I have. Never mind. Yes I have. I just remembered that I have indeed played a Call of Cthulhu game too. So never mind. But yeah. So
have you
I guess
played
do.
any of the other Chaosium games like RuneQuest, Seventh Sea, Pendragon?
I have not played any of those for sure. I mean, the game that Chaosium is really known for is Call of Cthulhu. I actually wasn't aware that they had fantasy games until I started reading this book. So the basic role playing book, because they mention all of them. But
yeah, no, they like there's I think RuneQuest, and I want to say there's like is that Mysteria or Miss? No, I'm thinking of something else. I think, but RuneQuest, I guess, has been where they get their combat. Call of Cthulhu is where they get their sanity and some of their other rules and stuff like that. And I guess the previous editions have been just kind of compiling all those different rules until it was just a big monstrous tomb of.
Yeah, Pendragon and RuneQuest look like the two like fantasy type games that they had. It looks like Pendragon being more realistic, and I think RuneQuest being more high fantasy. And then the sanity system is 100% Call of Cthulhu.
So Jeff, have you played any of the Chaosium games in any capacity?
The closest I've come was the Delta Green stuff that we've done. So there's some similarities with the D100, but I have not played the Chaosium games. I have sold them, I have seen them, I have looked at the books, but I haven't actually played.
Yeah, no. So I have to say that the basic role playing game. I mean, first of all, it is different because it is skill based and not character based, and so I think that its biggest claim to fame is that they like to use D100s, and it's roll under a certain skill. Critical successes are typically if you roll 1/20th of your skill, then you critically succeed. Otherwise, you get into fumbles and stuff like that if you roll a 99 or 100. So, I mean, from what I've seen, it seems like between this and a D20 system, I mean, is there really a benefit to doing D100 just out of the gate?
It's less swingy for the most part. Your I believe again the curve of how your rolls go is slightly less swingy than a D20. Because usually your skills are going to be 50% or something like that. So any addition will be a little bit better than a coin flip.
Yeah. So well, and if there are modifiers that are added, I mean, they're usually added not like by 1 percentage point. They're usually added in 5s, 10s, 15s.
Yeah. Yeah. Usually if there's a bonus, it's like you get a plus 10% to you, or a plus 10% to your roll, meaning that if you have a skill of 50, it acts as a 60, so you have to roll under a 60. And I'm not a math guy, but Like I said, I believe it's a little bit less swingy, and then advancement. Like when you have an advancement in a D20 or in a D100 system, like that 10% advancement means quite a bit.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and so it's so in terms of just the general improvements, it seems like they, they just have. First of all, they just cleaned it up. They got an editor in there, took out all the crap and all that kind of stuff, rewritten many of the rules for clarity's sake, and then of course they changed some of the terminology and everything like that to make it so it's a lot easier. In my read of it, it seems like honestly, I felt that this book was fairly easy to read, very straightforward. The only thing that was kind of intimidating for me as I was reading through it is that it's like there's a skeleton of a game that exists like right in the middle. And then every few pages, it felt like I was always being presented with the optional bolt-ons for each of the different styles, system, rules, settings, and all that kind of stuff. And so it was easy to kind of get lost in all the detours as I
mhm.
was reading through it because I was like, wait, you have sanity here, you have this here, you have different
Well, yeah,
you know
that's kind of one of those things that happens with I think a setting agnostic game is you say, well, here's some rules, pick the parts of the rules that fit your setting. And I
mhm,
think that's where you run into some of those. Oh, it's kind of weird that that's in here. I guess I won't use that for my game.
mhm,
Um, and that's always a little bit weird when you have to wade through a book and decide which systems are you're going to use within your game because it
mhm.
doesn't apply.
Yeah. And so there was a lot to it. Now the other things that they kind of did is they just, they simplified the core combat rules. Now as I because I read that as one of the additions that they did to the game. I actually read the combat rules a little bit just to kind of dive in and see how they played out. And I don't know if I like the declarative um kind of how the combat rolls out because the combat has gone in four phases, right? You have your statements, your powers, your actions, then your resolution. And I don't know, but it just seemed on the surface kind of convoluted, even with the quote unquote simplification. I mean, Brent, do you remember how your combat went in the game?
I mean, no, but I do know most of the time, some of the games, and I'm not sure if this is one of them, some of the games are like, make your declaration, then initiative, and like this weird ordering system, which
Hmm.
usually people just wind up ignoring. And they're usually just initiative, tell us what you're doing on your turn, roll your dice, resolve it.
Hmm.
And if it's anything but that, it's probably going to be that for any house rule sort of game.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that the part that always gets me is that it's just like whenever there's a parry or something like that, because I don't know if you saw in that section, there's basically a combat matrix that it's got the attack and defense matrix that it's just like defender parries or dodges, no other result. And I feel like if you have attackers and defenders being active in the same combat, I think that I've always felt that those systems got a little bit long-winded for a single action.
Well, it's one of those things. It's trying to be more simulationist than
Mm.
probably too simulationist if it's more like return attack roll. Sort of like systems that I've read where everything is contested. Like if you attack somebody, it's a contested roll, which means you both
Mhm.
have to roll dice. And then you see who wins. Like those just get so convoluted. So yeah, anytime that sounds kind of difficult.
Yeah, so I mean that was just my impressions of it. And I did see that they included things like melee weapon attack fumbles, so you'd roll on that. And of course, so in that time you rolled a 99 or 100, you'd roll another D100, then you would say, okay, well I hit a nearest ally for normal damage. and
Right.
so and so I feel like Brent, your eyes would roll, you'd be like, and critical
Yeah,
fumble.
it has the amazing critical fumble rules that make your character an idiot. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
always my favorite.
no one would be within 25 feet of Brent.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, you rolled another 99? Well, you managed to murder the entire party. Well, at least someone died in this game,
I
I guess. Not just my
no,
spirit.
I the rule set is pretty crunchy. I mean, the on one hand, I admire that each of your body points has a certain number of hit points. You know, that can get so your body can be worn down by repeated hits to the same area. But man, that's a lot of shit to keep track of. That is a lot.
Yeah. So, I mean, it does seem, I mean, honestly, it seems like the system is pretty solid, though. One thing that I thought was really neat was the fact that they gave you kind of, would you call it a recipe? If that is that the way you'd put it? So, if you wanted to play a certain type of setting or certain type of genre, you just literally go, okay, well, I want to play a superhero game, and then they suggest to you how to play a superhero game by making these adjustments to character creation, types of um, basically the type of thing that you're doing. So it would be like, this is I think that those were actually later in the book under the game master section.
Well,
But
yeah,
that
but I
was
mean, but that's the job of a system agnostic game. Like that's the
Mhm,
job. It's supposed to tell you the ways that you can use this in your game. If not telling you this is why you should use it instead of
mhm.
going and finding a real superhero game. Like if it didn't do that, it would just be like,
No. I'm talking about I was talking about the setting environments to kind of like tell you the levers to switch in order to make it feel more like that setting, if that makes
yeah,
sense.
no, I'm agreeing with you. And like I said, that's really what kind of these system agnostic, most of the system agnostic games, especially the crunchier ones like this, they
Mhm.
have to do that, because if they don't, you just have like, it's like having a recipe without anybody
Yeah,
telling you how to put it together.
Yeah,
that's true.
I think it's a good inclusion, and I'm with Brent. It has to be there because if you invest the time and learn the basic role playing system or one of the specific games that it underpins,
Mhm.
if you decide that you want to do something different for a weekend or a couple of weeks, nobody has to relearn rules. Nobody
Yeah.
has to learn a new system. You can just play the same system with a couple of tweaks, and
Mhm.
But it's
maybe
like,
a couple is underselling it, but
yeah, well, it's like GURPS when back in the day when you'd get that book and it's like, oh, it's the universal role playing system, but it didn't tell you anything about how to make a game feel like the game you wanted to play. You're like, you can use this rules to do anything, but then it's like, okay, it's a bunch of numbers. It doesn't really. It didn't tell you what lever, like you said, it didn't tell you what levers to pull, and so
Mhm.
you usually wound up just like giving up. Well, for the last time I tried to play a GURPS game, it was you gave up in character creation, but um, but you wind up playing a game that either kind of feels generic
Mhm.
or confused because you have a bunch of characters that don't match.
Yeah. No, I get that. I think it's just interesting to me because it feels like in terms of storytelling options, with these universal settings, it's and how do you make it tell the type of story and kind of live the setting you want. And I think I need to look at Genesis because Genesis is supposed to be pretty good at doing some of that too. But I felt like this was a pretty solid overall system. And honestly, the fact that they've basically taken whatever 40 years of learnings from all of their different games that they've published and basically condensed it down into one thing. I mean, talking about like Daggerheart, at the beginning of the podcast, I think this is kind of a neat thing that they're like, okay, well, this is our hat as a ring. Play our
Yeah.
games. You can use this as your foundation for telling your stories.
I will
You know.
say one thing. I really do like the unifying art of the Leonardo da Vinci's uh Portrait of Man or whatever. I
Mhm.
really do like their unifying like art choice to put that at the front page of every chapter.
Mhm.
In the different style of games, like there's a robot, there's a mutant, there's a zombie, there's a pirate,
Mhm.
there's a fish man. Like I think that's clever and I like that
Yeah, no.
from the art direction.
Yeah, it's a honestly, it's a really solidly I mean, it's a solid book. I think they put together a really good piece of work here. So,
it
I think
is.
what I think what they struggle with, like any basic like with any setting agnostic system, um, is one of the things that I would struggle with using it is what Jeff said is the best argument for using it is that if you want to switch between types of game and use the same rules, like this would be easy to like make a few changes and slap together a character. But I always contend that the rules for a setting kind of support it. So it would be difficult for me not to be like, why would I use this versus going and finding a superhero, like your superhero analogy. Why would I use this instead of using mutants and masterminds? Like, why would I? For what reason? So that's always going to be my curiosity is why somebody would choose to use this versus a different game.
Don't have $75 to buy a new book.
Well, there you go. That's a good argument. That is a good argument.
I mean, let's be honest. Even if you have it, you're not always willing to spend it.
It's true.
If it's going to be a one-time I used to be the guy that was like getting pumped and buying the new book, and you know what I mean? Like, we're going to try this system. Okay, I'm going to buy the book. And, because it's not always easy to share. And so the more copies you have, the easier it is to share. But man, it's sometimes you get burned because you're like, oh, I really like that system. And everybody else is like, we're not playing that again. It's like,
no, that's a good argument.
Dang it.
No, that's a good argument. And you can invest and you can invest in multiple games versus if you have mutants and masterminds, you're going to be playing a mutants and mastermind superhero game. Or if you buy Godlike, you're going to be playing a Godlike game. So I guess
although there's reasons to buy them all. I'm not saying don't buy.
No, I understand.
Books. I used to own a gaming store, so I'm a big proponent of people buying books.
Go buy stuff.
Huge proponent of buying books.
But I think that's a valid counterpoint to what I was saying is, well, this is the book I have, and this is the system we can use. And it's being and Mike has heard me rail against, instead of making your cyberpunk characters in D&D, you can actually just play a cyberpunk game with your basic role-playing system instead of making some nerd disturbance in the forest and his head explodes somewhere because you're making your cyberpunk character with AC and savings throws.
Yeah, and it's funny because like at the end of the day, when I look at like this basic role-playing system, I mean, I feel like I could tell some stories in it. There would be a learning curve to get it down. But a question for me is, does it scratch that epic fantasy advancement that it has, with its own way of like growing that character? I'm not sure. I felt that, whenever you roll like because I think you advance in this, as we discussed earlier, is that you basically, if you succeed in a role, because this is what I do like about the system, is that if you want to be that badass warrior, you do warrior things, right? You swing your sword, you attack people, and if you succeed at that, you get a chance to get better at those skills. Where if you don't do those things, you don't have a chance to get better at those skills. Right. And I think there's a trade-off in my brain that I'm like, that makes sense. It's not the what was it? It's not the Elder Scrolls, like I swing my sword as I'm jumping down the road kind of thing. But obviously, it is a.
But it could be. It could be.
I suppose, yeah.
But it's at least sensical. Whereas in like D&D, you're just like, you have got experience points. You are now leveled up. Ding. Things are better.
Yeah. Well, yeah. There's that that's the simulationist thing. It's like you get better at a skill because your character uses that skill versus the kind of an experience system kind of assumes that at some time during the adventure you used a skill in a way that may have improved, or you go see somebody who can teach you things off camera.
Yeah,
that's true.
This mysterious downtime that you're supposed to have in games.
One thing that I do find interesting is, did you find that the combat was fairly lethal when you looked at it?
Yeah, I mean, it seems, I don't think it was as lethal as some of the systems that I read, but I also didn't play through a round or two just to like test it out and see how you died. But I've heard that it's lethal.
Because like in Call of Cthulhu and like Delta Green, it's like if you get shot, like you're just potentially dead. Like, and so like if you get hit with a bat, like you're potentially dead. Like it's not. There's not much of a, hey, we're fighting. It's more of a like, hey, I stabbed you with my sword. Are you still alive? Sort of thing. So I'm curious.
It's, hey, I stabbed you with my sword. Oh yeah, well I failed my parry. Okay, so I really did stab you with my sword.
Yeah. So like it would definitely have a different, like if you're playing trying to play a high fantasy game, you'd have to remember that, because you're not going to have those like epic D&D combats, because there is a chance that like your epic bad guy could just be
murdered,
killed. Oh, you rolled lethality? I guess he's dead now. He rolled lethality. Oh, he rolled lethality on you? I guess you're dead now.
You'll be creating a new character for next session. Unfortunately, you have to start at level 1 while the rest of the party's level 4. Good luck.
But
if you recall, that was what I was really worried about in the Delta Green game was, does he have a gun?
If he does, I leave.
I stay behind cover.
Yeah. And I think that Delta Green is based on the gameplay. But are they compatible systems? Because it's actually Arc publishing.
No, they're
Arc
different.
Something.
Delta Green is a similar system with some big differences. For example, criticals, one example off the top of my head is critical successes and failures are any doubles above your score is a failure.
Mhm.
Any doubles below your score or is a critical failure. Anybody doubles below your score are critical success, which would be different than the 2/3 rule that sounded really weird to me.
What, the 1/4 rule or whatever?
Yeah, 1/4, 2/3,
1/20th.
Yeah, something like that.
It's the fractional rule. There's a fraction of your skill that you need to hit. I think it's between 1 and 5 is the.
Yeah, whereas Delta Green is doubles are either a crit fail or a crit success.
Yeah, that's right. I do remember that. So yeah. So I mean, at the end of the day, I think in terms of like balance, I think we'd actually have to play it to really decide how balanced it was, because I mean, there's a lot of different things that it engages with. It engages with magic, psionics, and engages with like modern fantastical types of things. So it's I think you could probably build a mech suit if you wanted to do that. But again, to your point, I'm not sure why you wouldn't just pick up a game of Lancer if you wanted to play mechs in combat kind of thing. But
because you don't want to pay for the book. We already covered that.
That's true. Although Lancer is pretty cool, I do like that.
I was already corrected on that. Okay, we don't need to rub it in.
I'm just providing one possibility. That's it.
I think that's a perfectly valid argument. Also, if you're playing your pirate game and then the next week you want to play your anime battle suits, that would be the reskinning that you need.
You know what, Brent? I'm not sure why you have to have 2 separate games there. I mean, if you want to have pirate anime battle suits, I mean,
he's not wrong. It does combine pretty. I never have conceived of it, but it does combine pretty seamlessly. It seems
somebody already conceived of it. It's called Rifts, okay, which is a game we haven't mentioned near enough on this podcast yet. I don't think so. There's our first Rift reference.
I think we may have talked about it one other time. There was somebody mentioned the Coalition at some point. I don't know why, but
because you definitely can play pirate, ninja, assassin, mech suit teams in Rifts for sure. I think I've played that game. I think that was definitely a high school game that I played in. Definitely.
Okay. Which are better, ninjas or pirates? Let's find out.
Pirate ninjas, obviously.
Pirate ninja juicer, thank you.
And is there a difference between a pirate ninja and a ninja pirate?
It's which eyes the eye patch is on.
Okay.
Unless you're blind. You're a blind ninja. And then you have to be a blind ninja pirate.
That'd be pretty BA.
Otherwise you're a blind pirate ninja who doesn't have any mystical powers to see anything.
Yeah, blind pirates retire, I think.
Well, I did always hear that the eye patch, what was it, that episode of Mythbusters where the eye patch was actually worn over a good eye, and then if they got caught in the dark, they could have their good eye already acclimated to
protect their night vision. That is correct.
Yeah, there's I won my trivia round for the day. Let's see. So, okay. Well, needless to say, I think we'd have to actually get into the basic role playing, and maybe we'll put that on our schedule of games to play, which, obviously that's down the road. So
that list is so long.
Like
so long.
It's way too long.
So long.
But if we actually give it a try and we test it out, we'll let you know what our anime pirate ninja game comes up with, how it played out. Was it the right rules for that setting? Who knows? And if it isn't the right rules, I'll try to find a rule set that can support that better.
I will say one thing. It would have to be better than when we tried to design the mech suit in GURPS and had to do hyperphysics and geometry to try and figure out what it's like. What was it like? Its carrying weight or land speed or whatever it was.
Yeah,
and we were just like, there's a lot of numbers involved in this.
I think that was the one time I was like, I don't think I think I need a TI-85 for this.
Yeah, it was.
I've never played GURPS, but everybody's got a story about how much math there are in it.
Yeah,
Like,
it's a lot of math up front. A lot of math up front.
But that's what makes it so fun, is that
you don't ask a lot of questions in GURPS. You don't say things like, well, exactly how fast can my airboat go? Because somebody's going to have
calculate
to figure that out. Yeah, because somebody's going to have to figure that shit out.
250
speed
miles
of
an
an
hour.
unladen swallow.
Yeah.
Jeez. So, okay. Well, I think that's all I've got to say on basic role playing. And I think we're at our hour mark. So I think what we could do is we could probably have Jeff, if you want to give everybody a reminder of where they can find us, because we do appreciate all of the people that listen to us to this point in the podcast. And then we'll sign off.
Yeah, if you'd like to reach us on social media, you can @Rollwise on Twitter, YouTube, or Facebook. And you can also email us at rollwiseguys@gmail.com, or you could just leave a comment right here on this video.
And as always, thank you for joining us for hopefully what was a good journey through the talk of basic role-playing games. And be safe out there, and roll well and roll wise. And see.